recording? There we go. Okay. So we left off really kind of, doing a little bit of work on our gear, right? And of course, whatever sculpting you're doing can be on the body or the gear. But I figured, it'll be a cool place to just show you a little bit about how you can use textures on a model here, right? So one of the things you can do, besides just, using your strokes, like we did last time, right, where you could use your line or drag dot, and that's kind of cool way to do those. You can also texture or sculpt with a texture, right? So the easiest way to sculpt with a texture is to actually load a texture in, right? So you can always go to texture up here, and you can always click on new, right? So if you go to texture here, you can click on new. It will bring it here, but then you'll have to kind of still go, usually kind of go down to here to the texture, right? There's kind of like this little red checkerboard kind of on our properties menu right here. If you click on that, it brings this up. You'll have a new texture option there, right? But you can also just go texture here and click on new as well, right? Once you've done that though, right, you can create a whole new texture if you want to. In this case though, I want to open a texture, right? So you can always click on new, but you can always just click on open as well, right? So kind of going to this little kind of red checkerboard, click on it, click on open. Like I said, ultimately it'd be cool if you guys could do this, but as long as you get some sculpting on your models, I'm going to be pretty happy with that. Now this is where you would kind of actually maybe switch to your thumbnails, right? Because remember, you can see it as lists, you can see it as small thumbnails, big thumbnails. That can show you some texturing there. I have some stencils and some textures that I've kind of downloaded from other stuff before. You won't have access to these. These will kind of have to be the thing you'll find online, right? You can always go to textures.com and create a free account. It gives you access to the lowest resolution textures, and you only have like 15 tokens a day, and that usually gets you a texture. But it's still a good way to kind of get safe, royalty-free textures that you can use for educational or commercial purposes. There's always the internet and just regular Google searches as well, but you will have to find your own textures. In this case, I figured it'd kind of be cool to just use something like this, right? Just to show this off. But you will kind of create your own textures, save them to a desktop, right? That's just, internet search, right? So I'm going to click on this one, right? And particularly if you want to do something like with these patterns, kind of look for like an alpha, right? Usually they're called texture alphas or something like that. Because what will happen with the sculpting is when we use it for sculpting, it won't sculpt the black of the image, but it will sculpt white and the grays, right? And how bright the pixel is will determine how much it sculpts out, right? Like a dark gray wouldn't sculpt out as much. A light gray or white would actually sculpt out more. But the black won't sculpt at all. But what you can do is you can just attach this, right? Open image. Now you have an image in Blender. If you go to the texture menu up here, you can see that it should be there now, right? So you can make sure it's the active texture. Now in this case, I've already got set to tiled, but you can actually change your mapping around in the texture menu, right? View plane will make this work like a stamp, where as you sculpt, it'll stamp that image down and it'll stamp it down, and it kind of depends on how much spacing distance you have for that. Stencil is actually a cool way to kind of do a more specific image-based version of it. I think we're going to use view plane. So we'll switch it to view plane there. If you go to stroke, you can actually see the spacing controls there, right? But you go to texture menu, you kind of make sure red checkerboard kind of open, right? And then it kind of lets you browse for texture, load it in. Then you'll see it'll be available in here to pick. And the more textures you load in, you'll have them all available here to kind of select. You do want to change the mapping type, right? There are several types. Area plane can kind of be cool for 3D stuff because it'll kind of work so that even when you're not facing the model, actually it's 3D, I believe. When you're not facing the model, it'll still sculpt on the surface properly. The big ones that I end up using though are view plane and stencil. We'll see stencil more when we do texture painting because all of these strokes and controls here for texture and stroke, they actually work for texture painting also. So in this case, I've got the texture set up. I'm going to use view plane mapping. All right. And then you'll see if I go in here, and of course we can make sure our sculpt amount is high or low, the strength. And you notice that you can put this on any brush, right? So I can just put it on the standard draw brush, right? So these controls are always available for whatever brush you're working in. And of course, you make your brush size bigger, right? And you see if I left click drag, you see how it actually uses that image to sculpt with. Now in this case, that's a little bit high in strength, so I'll turn that down a little bit more. And that's better. And you see how it kind of just keeps taking that texture and putting it down, putting it down, putting it down, so it's going stamp, 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 stamp. It's basically continually putting the image on as you paint. Now, like I said before, if you go to stroke and you turn spacing up a lot more, what that'll do is it'll give you more space between the stamps. So you see how now it actually has some distance between each stamping of it? So that's what your spacing controls, right? I probably didn't want something quite so high as this, but I wanted something higher than what I had by default. So you can always turn spacing up to give you a little more space in between the stamps. And you see how you can actually sculpt with an image. Now, obviously, it'll look even nicer if you subdivide this even higher. I'm just going to keep this a bit simpler for us, so, we don't have to worry about it too much. And, of course, you can hold down Shift, right? So if you want to soften this up a bit, you can hold down Shift to smooth. But you see how you can actually sculpt with a texture. Now, like I said, there's other ways to sculpt with textures, like stencil, things like that. But, I'm not trying to be exhaustive of everything you do with them. You could actually technically adjust the size of this stamp right here. So if you play with size, it'll make the image size smaller while not adjusting the brush size. So there's actually some neat controls you can get with this. We're just going to keep it basic, though. So you see how you just kind of just go in here and just, load a texture in, right? Go to the red checkerboard at the very bottom of our Properties menu, right? Load in a texture. It'll say Open. You can click on the Open button, and it brings up these controls. You can kind of find your image, loads it in. Then it's just available up in the Texture menu here, and you just kind of pick which one you want to use. And then you might just kind of tell it to be View Plane, right? Because that lets it do this kind of stamping effect where it just kind of sculpts it based on the view, and it just drops it down, drops it down. And of course, Shift for Smooth will still work as well for this. So if you want to soften some of those areas up a little bit, hold down Shift and it kind of softens it, right? And you see we kind of added some texture to this, right? And these actually work. Texture and stroke, all of this stuff works for painting. You have all these basic same controls doing a very similar thing just for painting color for our texture. And that's what we're going to see later this week. But this can actually be applied to a sculpt brush in the sculpting menu, right? So, fairly easy to add a texture. Like I said, if you don't get to this part, that's okay, right? As long as you're doing some sculpting, right? Like creasing, give some wrinkles and some muscle tone. Maybe a little bit of the dragged out rivets. That'll be cool. But at the end of the day, I want to make sure you guys have the knowledge that you can apply textures for sculpt. And that you can use a view plane in some cool ways. Now, once I've got that, what I can start to do now is start to think about baking, right? Now, Text Tools makes this easier, right? So remember, I'll just kind of show you again, right? If you just go to the internet and you type in Text Tools for Blender search, and you'll see right here, I'm using Text Tools with space, right? TEX space Tools for Blender, right? We can then scroll down, usually at the bottom. I like the releases version of it, right? Because it's easy to get to. So if you scroll down, because there's options like here, here, but I like the releases one down here. Click on that. And what it does, it brings you to Text Tools. And what you can do is you can just download the zip right here, the very top zip. Once you've downloaded that, right, but like I said, it's just a search, Google search, TEX space Tools for Blender. Once you do that, it brings this up. Scroll down to the Releases section. Click on it, that link. It brings this up. Scroll down until you see the zip file right here, Text Tools 144 zip. Click on that to download, right? And it'll go to your Download section. Then remember, you go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, right? So you go to your Preferences, Add-ons. And you can go to Install, right? And then you go find it where you've downloaded it. You can see there it is. I could double click on it, right? All you have to do is double click on it, or single click install add-on. It will be installed, and then you can just search for TEX to make sure it's on, right? You see how it's checked on. So it's really easy to install an add-on, and Text Tools is a free add-on, right? That kind of made it easy to get our preview texture on there. It's got some UV wrapping tools, which will be more useful for our hard surface modeling class, Modeling B, but it's definitely a cool add-on, right? It adds some nice functionality that we haven't taken advantage of that much on our project so far yet, but there's some cool tools in there. And it comes with a pretty easy-to-use baking system, right? So just go to your add-on section, click Install, go to your downloads, because that's likely where it downloaded that from the internet, and then just make sure to install, double-click on it, and then just make sure it's turned on, right? It's checked on, UV Text Tools, and there we go. And now that puts me in a place where I can go to UV Editing, right? So we go back to the UV Editing workspace, and you'll see right here, just like we kind of have on this side right here, there is in the UV Editing section an area where there's a little V, right? Kind of right next to your magnifying glass, right? There's that magnifying glass with the plus. There's a little V that points to the left, right? Click on that to open this up. That's where we could pick our resolution. That's where we could pick our checker map. I'm going to pick the 2048. If you want to go higher, you can. It just depends on if your computer, your device will let you do it, right? Obviously, my computer up here, my computer at home can handle more than 2048, but I'm going to keep it simpler for us. So 2048, but this is our resolution for whatever we're going to do, baking, or if we want to do the checker map stuff. We see down here there is the baking section, right? There's kind of these menus for UV layout stuff, and there's some cool UV layout things in there. But there's also a section called baking that we can open up. And you see how there's actually different types of baking you can click on, right? So you could bake out ambient occlusion. You could bake out tangent bevels, right? And a regular tangent normal, right? You could do world space or object normals, right? The tangent normals can be fine for us, right? So the default should be fine, but I want to point out that there are lots of different presets. Now, I've found the best way to get the result I like is, of course, make sure you're in 4 for object mode in this space, you know, right? Click on make sure the model's selected. And I like to turn down the level viewport to 0, right? I found that it lets this bake faster if it's not the highest resolution version, right? So I will usually kind of turn my multi-resolution down to 0. Technically, you could use multiple objects. This does let you bake through multiple selected objects. But in this case, since we kind of built the base mesh and then just sculpted multi-resolution right on there, we can skip that step. We don't really need to use that step. I usually like to make sure, though, that my level viewport set low to 0. And then I can click on Bake right here. And then we're just going to have to give it a minute. There we go. And see how it baked it out pretty quickly? And now you have a normal map, right? And you see what it did is it actually took the normal directions, right? That's our quiz today, normal direction. What the direction the polygon's facing. What a normal map is it's taking the normal directions of hundreds of thousands or millions of polygons, and it's turning them into a color, right? You can see there's kind of this predominant purple, but then you'll see there's kind of some magentas and some kind of some blues and some teals. That's actually giving different variations of polygons facing X, Y, or Z, or in between, right? So you will see red, greens, blues, and a lot of variations in between those reds, greens, blues. But basically this takes the normal direction of millions of polygons and it turns it into a colored pixel. Now once that's done, in the UV Editing workspace, because remember I switched to UV Editing workspace to get access to the text tools here, all right? Remember the text tools are kind of right here at the bottom, Magic UV, text tools. You'll see right up here, though, there is a view and an image menu, right? So if I click on image, I can go right in there. I can go to save as. And I'm just going to save this and just call it Biped Gear Normal. Now, you can save it as a higher bit depth to get a bit higher quality, but the defaults will be fine for us. They'll work fairly well. And that way you don't have to remember changing anything. So let's save image as. And there we go, that normal map has been created. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the multi-resolution, I'm going to get rid of the multi-resolution, right? So I can actually now hit the X or delete all, right? If you have the modifier tools up, you can hit delete all. Remember, there is an X for your modifier, so I can get rid of that multi-resolution modifier now. And then what I can do is I can go back to kind of the body here with its sculpting, and I'll turn its level viewport down to 0. And then we could bake again. Give it a minute. There we go. But I found that if you turn that level down to 0, it actually, sometimes if it's up at the higher levels and you get tens of millions of polygons, it'll take longer. Plus the higher resolution the texture bakes at. But also I've just found it gets hung up sometimes if it's not at 0. But there's now a normal map for the body, right? And we can go to Image, Save As. You see it's already kind of got a nice name for it there, Body. So we'll save Image As. There we go. And now we've got our normal maps, and once again I can delete that multi-resolution. All right? And now that sets us up with normal maps being baked. Right? I'm going to save this whole scene as really quick. Save as. Call this normal map. There we go. And of course, what I could do is I could go to the shading workspace now, right? There's now this area shading workspace. If I click on this, this will actually show our models, right? Now in this case, it did create these kind of older materials, right, that were used for our kind of preview. Now what's cool is you'll see that you can actually go in here in shading, right? Make sure use nodes is on. Usually it is on, but make sure to check use nodes on, right? Go to the shading workspace, and this is actually the whole tree. So you see how you can kind of click and drag on these different parts? So that's your material, and that's that UV grid that was plugged in there. Now in this case, I actually, I'm going to delete that for the moment. Oh, so select it, hit delete. I'm also going to go here, right? Right here is your actual material name, and I want to change the name of this material. I'm going to call it Biped Body. There we go. And now what I can do is I can go to Add, Texture, Image Texture. You see how it drops this in there? Now technically if you wanted to find something from outside, you can hit Open, but these normal maps are still in Blender, so if I just click on the little kind of, right, I'll zoom in here, right, there's that little kind of landscape picture, right, it looks like a triangle and a dot. If you click on that, there's your normals. Biped Normal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to left-click drag on the color dot, right? There's a yellow color dot. I'm going to left-click drag on that and drag it down to normal to plug it in there. Now I need to go to Add, right, Vector, Normal Map. And then I can just plug in the Normal Map section there. Tell it to use UVs, right? And you can actually turn that strength up for the normal map. So you can see more of the normal map sculpting on there. So this is how you can set up a simple shader tree to have your normal maps properly plugged in. Now I'm going to show that one more time on the gear. Right? So I kind of click on the gear. It's got its own material. I can name that Biped Gear. So there's kind of that name area right up here. If you click on this, though, you will see the other materials, right? So you can actually easily swap materials out just by selecting an object, clicking on this little kind of ball icon and picking what you want. In this case, we like gear. I'll get rid of the UV grid on that, right? Select it, delete. Go to Add, Texture, Image Texture, just like we did last time. Drop that in there. So you just drag it, left click. Remember, there is this little, and your navigation works the same in this, right? In your shading tree. Alt middle mouse button will move, Alt right mouse button will zoom. In this case, I don't have to open that texture, even though I could. I can just go to this little kind of triangle dot picture here, click on it, and find the other normal map. And then what we do is we left click drag on the color dot, right? So you see the dot right here, there's that kind of yellow dot for the color. Left click drag on it, drags up this line that we could then plug into normal map. Now I like to have the control of the strength here, so that's why I go Add. Again, right, it's that Add menu. Make sure Use Nodes is on so you can see all this stuff, right? Make sure that checkbox is on for Use Nodes. Now we go to Add Vector Normal Map. Not normal, normal map. right? Vector normal map. What's cool is you can actually drag this, and you see how when you put the normal map over the kind of curve here, it actually highlights white instead of gray. That means it'll plug it in between there, which is actually really cool. And then there's this little section right here where you could pick the UVs. And of course, you can turn the strength up if you want your normal map to look brighter. And now you've got a normal map plugged in. Here's the thing, though. You notice that this is low res, right? But you see how convincing that is? Still pretty convincing. So this is actually quite popular for video games, right? And if you need to have the look of detail without actually having millions of polygons, you sculpt them, and then you bake the normal map down. So remember, get that text tools add-on, right? That makes the texturing process, not only is that great and come with some cool UV tools, but it comes with a pretty easy system for baking. So I do want you guys to get that text tools add-on. I showed you how to kind of set it up here. I think one of the early UV unwrapping videos we did like a week or two ago has it in there as well. All right, I think that'll be a great place to stop for today.